Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sari Raskin, and I'm the Vice President of Grants and Community Leadership at the Community Foundation for Northern Virginia. We're thrilled to have everyone here, and just a quick background of how we landed here. We have an environment fund at the foundation, which I'll be telling you about in a few moments. And I am very involved in the Virginia Funders Network, which brings together funders from all over the Commonwealth. And I had the privilege of hearing from Mary-Carson at the most recent Virginia Funders Network conference and thought that her presentation was fascinating and eye-opening. And I thought it would be an interesting opportunity for us to feature the topic and Mary-Carson at our as an education event. And actually, we were planning to just offer it to our donors at the Community Foundation, but then there was interest from VFN members and others to participate. So we extended the invitation to others. And I have to be honest with you, I'm hoping that this is the beginning of a larger conversation that we have, and a group that we are convening to continue to discuss these very important issues, and potentially maybe there could be some opportunities for funding collaboratives in some way. So those are my ultimate aspirations, and that I'm hoping that that will be the result of some of the work that we're doing together. But to start today, welcome everyone. It's a nice group, and what I'd like to do is just quickly run through who we are at the foundation and talk about our environment fund, and then I will introduce Mary-Carson. So again, I'm Sari Raskin from the Community Foundation for Northern Virginia. We have a very aspirational vision to help build a community that works for everyone. And our mission is to advance equity across the region, which is Northern Virginia, in our case, through philanthropy and community leadership. And our values, you can read here, but basically, we really work to build a more equitable and inclusive prosperity that marries our economic strength with the full breadth of our diverse community. So we are really here to build up our community to help everyone in our region be successful and have opportunities. These are strategic priorities. We are right now working within our strategic plan that will take us through 2027. These are our 4 pillars: social and economic mobility, racial justice and equity, inclusive economic growth, and community resilience. And our environment fund, I think, is really within this community resilience space, protecting Northern Virginia's natural environment. And the mission, which is very broad of the environment fund, is to protect, restore, and improve the natural environment of the region, thereby enhancing the health and quality of life of its citizens and the economy of the region. And we have these goals. And we were talking earlier with Mary-Carson, and we were saying that we have very broad goals for the fund at this point. We are still on a learning journey to figure out where the largest needs are and where we can have the largest impact. Again, our dollars are not huge, but they are growing, and we're excited about that. And I'll be making a really exciting announcement in a few moments. But our goals are to support and encourage collaboration. That's really important. The collaboration component among nonprofits, businesses, governments, educational institutions, and private philanthropic donors. We have recognized that collaboration is what's going to make these ideas really happen and become a reality. And that we've decided to support public awareness and public education. So that's a lot of our grants have been around that, and that this idea of citizen engagement or civic engagement has really been a priority as well. So collaboration, again, education and awareness, and of course, civic engagement are some key components of this environment fund. And we've been around since 2018. We've awarded over $390,000, and you can see the organizations that we have funded. Again, very broad base. I'll say one quick thing about this past year, which was so exciting, that we recognize that there are organizations in this space at the various budget sizes, small to very, very large. And so our donors and our discretionary grants, funds actually allowed us to do something this year that was very different, but that we're really trying to do along all of our focus areas, which is to offer a tiered funding model based on your budget size, knowing that there are some environment fund organizations that are not as sophisticated as some of the larger ones, but of course they have funding needs. And so the idea was that if we offer different tiers and different amounts, that we can get access to organizations that we don't know about, learn about them, learn about this issue even more, figure out what the needs are, and then also let those organizations know we really appreciate the work you're doing, even though you're not as large as some of the others. We want you to be successful, and we want to help you build your organization. So this is our exciting announcement. It's the first time we actually said this out loud, but our ultimate goal with all of our discretionary grant focus areas is to have large endowments. And I think Tara and I were just speaking about this. I think that this is the first endowment that we have, a focus area endowment that has reached $1 million. So I'm excited to say that the Environment Fund has $1 million endowment, and we are so grateful at the foundation for our donors that have made this possible. And again, this is a huge milestone for the foundation, but I'm thrilled to say, and Mary-Carson, we were talking about this as well, this is very unusual that we have $1 million endowment for the environment or climate change. Most community foundations do not. I'm in touch with the New York Community Trust through my work through a national entity around climate change. They, of course, have large dollars going to the environment. However, most community foundations do not have this. And so we are really at this pivotal moment at the foundation. Our ultimate goal, honestly, is to have $1 million endowments in all of our focus areas. And I'm thrilled to say that our first one is around climate change and the environment. So kudos to us. I will say thank you again to our donors who have made this possible, and we are thrilled to continue to have impact in this area. So for more information about how you can continue to contribute to our Environment Fund, please reach out, or if you know of organizations that are in our region who would love to apply, let me know as well. And we're so thrilled everyone is here. And there'll be an opportunity at the end for Q&A. So if there are any questions you have for me, please either send them to me in the chat, or you can reach out to me, or you can ask some questions at the end. So I'd like to begin the presentation at this point. So welcome everyone. I can see everyone at once. Lovely. I wanted to quickly just introduce Mary-Carson from Wetlands Watch. And Mary-Carson is the executive director of Wetlands Watch, and she's the vice chair of the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation, a certified floodplain manager, and serves on the technical advisory committee of Virginia's Coastal Resilience Master Plan. Mary-Carson obtained a JD in 2013 from William & Mary and a BA from Bates College in 2008. And again, when I heard Mary-Carson speak at the VFN conference, she opened my eyes to so many aspects of this issue that I had never thought about, honestly, and didn't realize how relevant it was to where I live, which is not on a coast. I mean, I'm not directly connected to a body of water. However, when you hear the presentation, your eyes are going to be opened. And I think for us in the Environment Fund, it will give us some more information, education about some other areas that we can fund as well. So welcome, Mary-Carson, and we're so thrilled you're here.
Thank you so much. I'm really flattered and beyond thrilled to be here. I must say, to be invited to participate and talk about the work that's going on in Virginia related to climate change is a big deal in and of itself. And then to be able to do it in conjunction with such a huge announcement of progress and success and recognition of the importance of these issues in Northern Virginia, it's a real honor. And I also have spent time in Northern Virginia. I lived in Arlington for a few years in between college and grad school, and then during grad school as well. And so I have a special affinity for Northern Virginia communities. And I also lived in Alexandria. I forgot that. So anyway, thank you for having me. I am everybody can see my screen. Just want to double check. Great. I'm going to talk about climate change. And this presentation is going to be, a wild ride. So please buckle up and bear with me through some of this depressing stuff that we're going to talk about. At the other side of the impacts and the reality and the science is going to be a discussion about what communities are doing, what organizations are doing, funding opportunities. And so I promise there will be some positivity at the end. And I think that's really important because this issue is daunting. It's complex. And if we don't start really shifting towards, we can do stuff about this, it really will not benefit the cause. So that's where I'm coming from. And so please know that that will come, even though the beginning is going to be pretty sad. So let's jump into it. I just want to also say that this is going to be a overview of the issue. There will be so many things that are not included in this presentation. Be happy to discuss anything in more explicit and specific detail at a later date. Or there's also going to be a Q&A section. But just know this is the tip of the iceberg, every pun intended, of this issue. And there's just so much more that could be said. I'm also going to talk about a few of our programs, but I'm not going to talk about all of our stuff. This is going to be an overview. And so it's not intended to just be about Wetlands Watch. It's going to be about a lot of the work that's going on wholesale. All right, so let's get into it. A little bit about Wetlands Watch. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We're based in Norfolk, Virginia, but we work statewide. Our mission is to enhance natural resilience, bolster community adaptation efforts, and protect and restore wetlands throughout Virginia. We advance climate adaptation by working collaboratively with a wide variety of stakeholders and by implementing solution-focused strategies that are unconstrained by institutional silos. Our values, I love that Sari included the Community Foundation values. Our values are that we are adaptive, we are collaborative, we take calculated risks, we are solution-focused and biased towards action. So we like to get things done at our tiny little nonprofit with 8 staff people just cranking it. So we have a ton of different program areas. We have kind of buckets around green infrastructure, which we're calling living infrastructure. You can see the living shoreline down here in the bottom left. We focus a lot of work in flood risk management. This is all about local government planning, land use decisions, where it's supposed to flood according to FEMA. FEMA runs the show in the flood risk space, and you got to know all about the National Flood Insurance Program if you want to do this work. We're definitely going to talk about wetlands migration, and we're going to get into a lot of details on that specific issue, but we got to keep our wetlands moving so they survive. And local government advisory, we do this in every single program area. We know that local governments are on the front lines of climate change, and they need to be the focus of a lot of this work. Land use decisions happen at the local level. Shoreline regulations are enforced at the local level in Virginia. And all kinds of planning decisions, long-term and short-term, are defined by local government action. Money, it's a local government game. We're definitely going to talk about that. So just a little preview of what Wetlands Watch is all about. Now we're going to dive into the impact. So this is the kind of depressing stuff that I warned y'all about. It is an irrefutable fact because of historic data that sea level is rising right now. We're in a period of rise. We have had a fluctuation in global sea level rise forever. You can see this chart goes back to 400 BC. So we've been in periods of fluctuations. That's normal for our Earth. What is not normal is for our global sea level rise to do something like this. Can y'all see my, okay, good. You can see my little mouse guy. Okay, so everyone, this is not normal, right? So we're in a different period that's not typical of what we've experienced in the past. As I mentioned, historical sea levels have risen and fallen for years. We're at this period right here where we're doing something different. These large periods of extreme low sea level and extreme high sea level have occurred, and we're going to talk about the latest iteration of each one. So the last time that sea level was very, very low was about 20,000 years ago, when there were glaciers 1 mile thick over New York. and sea level was 360 feet lower. This is what it looked like. Our East Coast Earth mass, the land, was in fact this far off of our current coastline. So this is what it looked like when sea levels were about 360 feet lower. The last time that we were in a period of extreme high sea level rise was 120,000 years ago, where oceans were 4 to 6 meters above present sea level and temperature was plus 3 degrees Celsius. A lot of climate data is in the metric system, so apologies for not having the conversion on the screen. But you can see what this looks like, an unusual hump. And unfortunately, that's kind of where we are right now, but we haven't, of course, topped the graph. But this is the last time we experienced something like this 120,000 years ago. And this is what our East Coast looked like. So this is going to be hard for y'all to see, but this is the Eastern Shore right here. This is Portsmouth, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Newport News, Hampton, Poquoson, coming up into the northern neck here, and across the Potomac in Maryland. So 120,000 years ago. So where are we right now? This is a map of historic sea level as measured in by a NOAA tide gauge. So this is not a projection. This is what is in fact occurring since 1990. So you can see that we are on a upward trend of sea level, and this is the Norfolk tide gauge because it's where sea level rates are highest on the East Coast. Norfolk has the highest rate of relative sea level rise. So what this looks like is about 1.5 feet from the last century. So again, highest rate. So what is relative sea level rise? We use this terminology because it is the level of sea level relative to land and land movement. So all across the United States, land is either rising or sinking or staying static. And in Galveston, Texas, it is sinking fast, real fast. And that has a lot to do with its situation on the coast. It also has a lot to do with the oil and gas industry extracting from the earth. We're going to talk about that. There are places where it's good news. In Alaska, their land is rising. And so they're not dealing with the same issues that we're dealing with here on the East Coast. So in Virginia, our relative sea level rise is made up of about 10 inches of land subsidence, so land sinking, and 8 inches of sea level rise. So right now we're sinking faster than the sea is rising. And the expectation is that the land subsidence, the sinking, will equalize with the sea level rise eventually. But right now, this is why it feels so bad in coastal Virginia. Why are we sinking? So why are we having this subsidence? There are several factors. The first is something called isostatic rebound. And if you want to look real fancy at a dinner party or like a mega nerd, you can say this phrase. But it's essentially what happens when glaciers start receding and start melting. And unfortunately, if you're looking at a glacier, here's like New England, New York area, and here's Virginia. The way that the recession of the receding of the glaciers working is it's tilting New York just slightly up and it's tilting Virginia down. So it's just unlucky that we're on the wrong end of this seesaw effect of the glacier receding. We're withdrawing a ton of groundwater. And every time you do that, you start to sink a little bit more. We are down 100 to 200 feet from pre-colonial times in our groundwater table. So we're doing something wrong here. And then finally, the meteor that created the Chesapeake Bay is offering some impact or some contribution to our subsidence or our sinking. So the subsidence from groundwater withdrawal is really it's the biggest problem. And this is occurring because of our paper production in Virginia. West Point is the paper mill closest to y'all, and Franklin is the paper mill closest to me. I'm right here today. So these huge water users are sucking the water out, and these you can see actual depressions, and they are worse the closer you are to these plants. As data centers become more of a reality for all of our communities, this water withdrawal will also contribute to our subsidence. So we have to be really mindful of that. Looking at about 15 inches per 100 years of subsidence. So it's not nothing. It's actually a pretty significant contribution to the impacts that we're feeling due to this subsidence. There's another thing that's happening for our relative sea level rise. This is the last contributing factor. We're close to the Gulf Stream, right? And for some reason, everybody's read all the articles about ocean currents changing. It like just terrifies you while you're scrolling on your phone at night, keeps me up. It's terrible. So that effect is having an impact on our Gulf Stream. So it's slowing down. And the Gulf Stream isn't flat. It's kind of like this. And so when it slows down, it is the curve, like the ridge of the stream of water that's just like shooting up the East Coast is leveling out. And the leveling is pushing water towards our coast. So we're on the wrong side of the luck coin with the impacts of this Gulf Stream changing. It's pushing more water towards our coast. And it's not just us, it's north of us too on the East Coast. We're just getting the worst of it, of course. Okay, so that's the sea level rise trends. That's why it's happening. It's why it feels terrible, and the impacts are so extreme. I'm gonna show you the impacts as well. What is confusing is that what projections look like for the future sea level rise are all over the place. We can't get entities, scientific entities, to agree. And it's creating so much confusion for entities that are responsible for actually doing something about climate change and sea level rise. So I know you probably can't see this, but it basically shows this kind of national standard curve in blue, showing a low, like a lower risk curve, a middle risk curve, and a high risk curve. These low, middle, high. Low is like we do nothing to curb climate change impacts, the actual mitigation of greenhouse gases. We do a little bit to curb, and then we do nothing, and the impacts worsen the most in the highest case scenarios. We do a little bit, and the impacts are reduced somewhat, and then everything stays as status quo. So we are looking at some extreme possibilities, and the ice melt is the biggest contributor for those extreme scenarios. So lots of different entities, a national standard here, a state, Virginia Institute of Marine Science, a state science standard here. NOAA has their own curves, as does the Army Corps of Engineers. And everybody uses different curves, and everybody uses different actual planning curves, that low, medium, or high, to make decisions. And that is not helpful, and it's creating a ton of confusion everywhere. So in response to this, the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, and I use this as an example because the Northern Virginia Planning District Commission is well aware of this happening, and this could be something that they adopt in the future. Hampton Roads Planning District Commission said, curve confusion is so bad, and it's making it difficult for our local governments and our regional planning authorities, like our transportation authorities that, of course, are doing interlocality work, regional planning, and regional standard work, need direction. And so they decided that they were going to look at the NOAA, use the NOAA intermediate high curve, and take that kind of best guess at what sea level rise is going to look like, and then make decisions in the short term, medium term, and long term, and set a level of sea level rise that's correlative with those planning benchmarks. So short term being 2020 to 2050, this curve says an additional 1.5 feet of sea level rise. And then from 2050 to 2080, that's that midterm, an additional 3 feet of sea level rise. And then finally, the long term, 2080 to 2100, 4.5 feet of sea level rise. So you can see it's mostly along this intermediate high curve, but a little bit more conservative the longer out you go in time. So this is a great thing that the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission did. And to our knowledge, there's only one other regional entity that's taken such a precaution, and they are in Florida, kind of near Miami-Dade. And this is what we hope that regions will get behind. And if not, local governments will get behind, state agencies will get behind, et cetera. As a reference point, the state of Virginia has decided that the purple curve, or the NOAA Intermediate High curve, is the state's curve for planning purposes. And so that's where we are, state of play in Virginia, and then more specific state of play down in southeastern Virginia, Hampton Roads. What does this mean, really? You add more sea level rise, the 2 feet, 2050, 2060, and all of your storms of record in the past, this will be hard to see, but it's basically, this is the worst storm that we've experienced. It was the 1933 hurricane. It was horrible. Hurricane Isabel was second worst. You basically take these storms of record, and your ones that are least consequential, so they have the least amount of water, you add 2 feet to them, and they move all the way up into the worst case scenario storms, the worst historic storms that we've experienced. So you add more water and the impacts just get worse. And so this is the kind of, this is why the projections are so important, so that people who are in charge of planning for emergency preparedness can say, okay, we know what pictures look like from 1933, and we know that if we're going to plan for storms like a nor'easter from 2 years ago, we need to be sure that our standards are anticipatory of this big change, this big additional amount of water. Okay, so that's sea level rise. There is one other huge climate change stressor in Virginia that's surprising everybody, and it's increased rainfall. We know that there is about an average of 18% increased rainfall intensity and duration in Virginia since 2006. And this is showing the old curve. And so basically the red is old and the blue is new. We know this is occurring. We've had this study completed by Marissa, which is, a mid-Atlantic entity. And yet our state has not yet adopted it yet. And so this is what a lot of organizations are focusing on. How do we create standards that reflect this change so that all of our stormwater pipes are sized correctly? And in Virginia Beach, the only community in the state to do something about this, they did a study and they said, okay, we see 20% increase, which validated this Marissa study. And so all of our green infrastructure, like BMPs, so like retention ponds in shopping parks or shopping centers, are going to be upsized to account for this risk. All of our pipes are going to be bigger to account for this risk. So only city that's taking that additional step to make sure that rainfall impacts are not horrific. So sea level rise, increased rainfall. That's the compound flooding effect that we're seeing statewide. What are the impacts? What do they look like? And I'm going to talk about kind of different sectors of impact. To our transportation system, this becomes extremely problematic, particularly when you have high, important, critical facilities like hospitals, blood bank, this is a blood bank, blood banks, et cetera, that prohibit people from being able to get assistance in an emergency situation. This is not a storm. This is just high tide with a little bit of wind. You can see a little wind on the water, little ripples. So this is, not a dangerous event, but even our higher high tides are prohibiting people from being able to get emergency response and services. This is a rainfall event, and you can see that this is an underpass, and so there's a road here above where the truck is, and it's inundated because at sea level, the water. So there's a drain down below right here. All of our drains are full of water 24/7 in our region. And so when you add rainfall on top of them, there's simply no place for the water to go. And so during our higher high tide events, our storm drains are flowing the reverse direction that they're supposed to, because the water's coming up from the ground or coming in from a creek. And sometimes those creeks are visible, like you can see them, and sometimes they're underground because we filled in all the old creek beds in our communities for development. So it's why the impacts are so exacerbated in our urban communities. We did it to ourselves. We just didn't know that it was going to hurt so bad because of the changes that we are now experiencing. This is a pretty obvious impact here. In Virginia, we're having flood days instead of snow days, and kids can't get to school. They have delays to get to school. It's just happening more and more frequently, and it's a good thing to not have kids on this bus riding through this water. But it does create disruptions to the economy, to parents who are working, and to the kids who need to be in school learning. Housing availability, already one of the biggest challenges we're facing right now in America, but you add risk on top of it in specific areas, and it compounds this existing problem. We're jacking houses up, but then you can't get to your house during a flood event. That's not a good thing to do, like right here. So you can raise your homes, which is smart, because then the contents will be safe, and we want to protect people's properties. But this is a Band-Aid solution to a much bigger problem. Families aren't safe if an emergency vehicle can't get to them if there's a heart attack in the house or something like that. This is what flooding looks like when it's fast and quick. And this is the 2020 flooding that occurred in Southwest Virginia. Horrible impacts in Tazewell, essentially that whole area. And, houses just getting moved from their foundations because there's no protective building standard in place, no anchoring, no pilings to hold the buildings up and allow for the water to flow through. So this is just to show that this issue is not just a slow water moving problem of higher high tides. This is a life and safety problem in our riverine communities, where when it floods, the water's fast, and it does kill people, and knocks houses over, and it's a devastating impact. This is one of my favorite images to show. It might not mean anything to y'all, but if you look at this, you can see this is the only major road that gets you from here to here, and of course it's impassable. And then you look closer and you're like, gosh, that house, yeah, that looks okay. And what is this right here? This is a septic field. So septic issues are the canary in the coal mine for climate change. We are worried about how septic systems are going to stand up to climate change. And the reality is they're not standing up to them. They're rising up from where they were installed, and are floating because groundwater is simply pushing them up. And so this becomes a real significant safety issue for humans, and obviously a water quality issue for our water health, our bay health, et cetera. So extremely common for septic failures to result in the non-use of septic systems that are then still used because people don't have money to fix them because it's so expensive. And then also oyster leases next to failing septic systems have been shut down, which creates an impact on the economy. Business disruption. I love this image with the Alexandria seal. I think it's so powerful. And this is Roanoke, whose downtown mall area is so critical for their economy. So business disruptions are huge. Once your business floods, it's a very low percentage chance that you're going to get back on your feet, unless you're in, Venice and some parts of Norfolk where people lift up their shoes and, are drinking a beer wearing galoshes. It's a different vibe, and it takes a specific type of person to endure such a thing, or a specific type of business. All right, so the thing that we care a lot about is the natural resource loss. This phenomenon of water encroaching on a shoreline is resulting in the die out of these trees because the trees are not intended to be inundated with salt water. And this is an image from Gloucester County. The shoreline is eroding at multiple feet per year. And the die out of the trees is becoming very common along our coasts. And the result is what people are calling ghost forests. The forests look like, look haunted. And so this is happening everywhere. What it really says to us, though, and this is where kind of the policy stuff comes into play, is that this shoreline, our whole shoreline ecosystem, our whole coast is changing dramatically. And the shifts will have a huge impact on land use, shoreline regulations, and people and buildings and properties and infrastructure that's in the way. So we have current sea level, everything's dandy, it looks good. You get future sea level and everything starts moving. So you've got your current tidal wetlands here, you got your current tidal wetlands here, and then you add your Chesapeake Bay 100-foot buffer. When you have sea level rise, this tidal wetland zone goes into your Chesapeake Bay buffer zone, and you can lose your bay buffer if it doesn't have space to move. So our migrated tidal wetlands are going to be moving, and we have to start thinking about what are we going to do to keep the shoreline ecosystem intact if we can. Can we? I don't know. There's a lot of infrastructure that's in the way. This is one of the biggest issues that our organization thinks about and works on. The Coastal Resilience Master Plan, released in the last 2 years, revealed that with sea level rise, we're looking at 89% loss of tidal wetlands by 2080. Upland habitat, upland wetlands, looking at 51% loss. It's a game over statistic here. And so got our work cut out for us. What's interesting is that statistic, that 89% and the 51%, they don't account for wetlands moving, for that shoreline ecosystem to actually migrate. And so when you do accommodate and have areas of migration, that 89% projected loss jumps down to about 40%. And in the climate change adaptation space, this is a win. We're never going to get what we want with climate change and with sea level rise. We're going to get the best that we can get. And that is the goal. And that needs to be considered success and a marker of success. So we're aiming for this 40%. But unfortunately, it means that you have to allow for the shoreline ecosystem to migrate or somehow maintain it in place. So harder to do that maintaining in place. It requires, more sediment, more plants, et cetera, lots of management. Migration into the landscape might be a safer bet. The problem is that we have a lot of built infrastructure that are in the way. In Virginia, the reason why we're losing these wetlands is that their vertical growth rate is slower than our sea level rise growth rate. So that they're drowning because the water's taking over all of their roots and the actual plants and drowning them in place. And so that's why the migration is so critical into the landscape. This is our shoreline regulatory space. This is what we really need to be focused on and thinking about. And how does this change when our laws are static? What do we do about that? And there's been some movement in Governor Northam's administration to look at climate change in our shoreline regulations, but the rollout has been real rocky. And so we're waiting to see how it works. Just a quick demonstration of what it looks like. We got our wetlands regulations here. We've got our Chesapeake Bay Act protections, our 100-foot buffer here. And then we've got private land where people's houses are. This change is essentially just a migration uphill. And so we want to just get from here to here, if we can, to help preserve our shoreline ecosystem. So this is the future. We've got science fiction meeting the Wild West. We've got change we've never experienced before, and we have no laws that are making space for it. So we need to develop new and innovative legal and policy tools to anticipate the future. We worked with a nonprofit called the Elizabeth River Project to place the first rolling conservation easement on a property that essentially monitors sea level rise onto the property over time and requires the demolition of the structure and all of the built components when the water becomes so high that use of the facility doesn't make sense anymore. This is the accommodation of wetlands into the landscape. This took so long to put in place, and it was just recorded in January. We need living infrastructure to capture our rainfall and our tidal flooding to slow it down. We have to think about stop capturing the water, slowing it down, and allowing a slow and gradual release into our existing infrastructure, because our existing infrastructure, it's undersized. And so we have to change our landscape to accommodate for this change. And conservation landscaping and green infrastructure is the way to do that. We also need people doing the work. We need workforce development. We need pipelining of climate adaptation professionals, and we need it at all levels. We are the Virginia partner of a huge landscape professional certification program called CVLP. We run it a lot in Northern Virginia, and we've got an apprenticeship program working with high school students to get them thinking about this as a potential career path, because there aren't enough people to do the work, and therefore the work's not getting done. We need neighborhood-centered solutions. We've been working in a community in the city of Hampton called Aberdeen Gardens, where we are, and these folks would kill me for using this picture, because it just shows like how much work it is. We're literally asking people in vehicles to fill out surveys to get their feedback on what type of solutions they want in their community, because right now everybody's just making plans without involving the communities where these projects are going to be installed. And it's a capacity issue at the local government level. So let's acknowledge that capacity and let's fill the gaps. And Wetlands Watch completed this plan about a year ago. And now we've applied for an EPA grant to do actual installation of the projects that everyone in the neighborhood has voted on and they've prioritized. And so this is the way to do it. We also need stronger floodplain standards that keep houses out of these high flood risk areas. Keeping people safe is just so important with all this risk. The good news is that funders are moving local government progress. Credit rating entities woke up about 2017 and said, hey, this looks pretty bad. Can you all tell us at the local government, city, municipal level, what you're doing about this issue? Show your work. And this made a huge difference in our local government responses. Now, I want to talk about funding, and I know I barely have any time left, so I've taken a little bit too long. So from a funding perspective, we're going to go federal, state, local. There are billions of dollars in federal climate resilience funding. I'm sure you all know this. The infrastructure acts have been huge. All these agencies have all these resources available. It is so competitive and extremely costly to apply. We've heard that it costs an entity, like usually a local government, from $1,000 to $10,000 per application. This is only possible for our high capacity communities. No one else can touch this money. No nonprofits that don't have big capacity and grant writing experience can ever get this money. So to say that it's available and it's going to make such a big difference, it will for those who can access it. They don't require future conditions. They're not looking at making sure that what's installed is going to last. And they're not funding exploratory projects that could or couldn't work. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So our goal, what we hope for these projects, is that you get larger infrastructure projects that are centered in neighborhoods where you, like an entity, a local government that has capacity, can do pass-through funding to the community to make sure that they're going to be involved. But what you're getting out of these funds is large infrastructure projects. And this is what it kind of looks like. So this was the first massive HUD grant that came out of a student design project that Wetlands Watch organized with Old Dominion University and Hampton University with funding from Virginia Sea Grant. It's the neighborhood of Chesterfield Heights in Norfolk, and it's a massive project that involves pumps and gates and berms. And this is what it looks like now completed. Huge endeavor, raised roads, pumps up the wazoo here and here. Permeable pavers here, huge berm here, living shoreline components, just massive project. And it wasn't just the 112 million. There was other funding sources that was used. You all have up in Northern Virginia, have a big project that has some brick funding, but then this is FEMA grant funding, but then a ton of other money in Alexandria. We don't know what the results are going to look like, but we do know what some of the plans include. So this is this big money coming from the federal government. State money, a little bit more likely. The Virginia Community Flood Preparedness Fund is a local government centered fund that was funded through Virginia's participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and is now funded through state appropriations. It's all about capacity building and studies. And then once you get money for an actual resilience plan that shows that you're going to actually do this work in this way, then you get project money. So we just love that it was set up this way. There's another fund that the state has set up that's for revolving loans. It's private property centered. It actually comes from some of the big banks that are worried about the investment of their mortgaged properties. But no money has been distributed. It's a huge barrier because of local government capacity to manage the fund, but then also service the loan. So we're just not there yet, but the money will be available in the future. Finally, Virginia Conservation Assistance Programming funding from VCAP. The users are soil and water conservation districts, but again, the barriers are not without a lot of issues. It's a reimbursement model. People just can't get reimbursed for grants always. Soil and water conservation districts are none are created equal. They're all different. And there's a huge lack of capacity. And what we've been hearing repeatedly is that there's a lack of workforce to even do the type of projects, which is all small scale green infrastructure, living infrastructure practices. There's nobody to even do it, which is why that certification program, the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Certification Program, is so important at building a workforce. Finally, we had this grant that we were running with the Virginia Outdoors Foundation that we designed at their request and we're administering at their request. Small program, certainly, but we designed it knowing everything we know about grant programs and how difficult it is for entities to use them. And we designed it in response to that. And so we're really proud of what we did with this grant because we live and breathe it. We're supported only by grants, so we understand. And we've given out, it's about, maybe $250,000 so far. This is a little bit of an outdated slide. So the funding is tied to the Virginia Outdoors Foundation. And every time you make a land recordation, there's like a $1 fee. All that money goes to the Virginia Outdoors Foundation, and then they use it for these special pet project grants. But we have no money because the interest rates are so high and people aren't buying houses. And so we'll keep the grant open and we hope to find additional funding in the future. Finally, this is to you all, the funders. I've said this before, but it just begs repeating. Local governments are on the front lines. They need help with this. And so you can either fund entities fund them or fund entities that will help them and fill the gaps, do the work that they can't do. SURCAP, the Southeast Rural Community Assistance Project, is incredible. Academic institutions are doing so much support work. And then nonprofits like ours and our many partners are also doing this important gap filling work. The best climate adaptation is happening through local land use decisions, like we discussed, planning, zoning, building codes, flood zone and floodplain management. The insurance universe is driving so many decisions here, stormwater management. So these land use decisions have such a ripple effect on all of the impacts of climate change, and definitely should be a focus. These impacts are happening to people and properties. And so the smaller scale you go, the better the work is. Finally, just want to say that this notion of science fiction meeting the Wild West is real. And it's really hard to do creative, innovative work. And funding sources don't always acknowledge that there is so much newness and uncertainty around developing solutions to this unique challenge. And so I just feel like it's so important that resources are available to research, to partner, to experiment, to play, and to potentially fail, because we just don't know exactly what we're doing. We're trying our best, but this is hard, and it takes a lot of you have to fail a little bit to learn what's important and how to be successful. So I know I'm sorry I went over, but I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to y'all, and happy to speak offline with anybody after this if it's helpful.
Thank you, Mary-Carson. I know a lot of really important information, and I know it was probably very eye-opening for many people to think about. Again, the impact of that stat around rain increase over time of 18%, and I mean it's affecting all of us. We know that we experience it every day now. There's always a weather alert, or I mean we're in this space, so we understand. I just really appreciate the fact that you really presented it from a historical perspective, actually, and also things that are about to happen and we should be ready for, and some tools and ideas of how we can engage in this effort, knowing it's a really, really big issue. I wanted to just leave it up to this group. If there are questions, to please feel free to raise your hand, or actually just get yourself off mute and feel free to ask some questions. Anyone? I know people. Oh, go.
Sorry,
Amanda.
I was just going to say, I don't really have a question, more of an anecdote. You know, we had those really strong storms on Sunday, and my family in Connecticut relayed to me just the news coming from the storm of how, I think it's a town called Monroe, Connecticut. They had a bridge fall down from the strong rain, and two women unfortunately passed away because they were caught in the storm, and the schools have to reroute their bus routes because the bridge is collapsed. So yeah, this presentation I felt was very timely and a little more eye-opening. So thank you.
Thank you. And if this provides any safety solace, in Virginia, there's only one state agency that has taken that 18-20% average increase rainfall intensity and duration work and applied it to standards, and it's Virginia Department of Transportation, and they applied it to their bridge standards. And so existing bridges, be careful, don't drive in a rainstorm, but new bridges and improvements will reflect that increased intensity, which was the factor in the Connecticut storm.
Thank you.
Hi, I had a question. I'm also from the Community Foundation. Gabby Webster, good to see some of our donors on the call. But you mentioned that Galveston was sinking quickly because of the oil. Is that because of fracking, water uses, or or like different reasons for what's happening in Northern Virginia?
Absolutely. Good question. It's from water usage.
Okay.
Yep. Great question.
And have you been doing any work with Alexandria and Arlington? I know they're seeing flash floods.
Yes. We work, one of the things that Wetlands Watch, that we are the chair of a statewide community of practice for flood risk professionals. And that is statewide. We have representatives from Alexandria, Arlington, Fairfax, et cetera. And so, yes, and I've specifically been working with Alexandria for probably the longest on their amazing flood plans. Alexandria is doing terrific work, as are the other communities, but of course, with Alexandria's specific risks in the downtown and shoreline, they're doing quite a lot, especially in the fundraising space. So yes, absolutely. Great work. We've been engaging with them for a while. And on the landscape side of things, on that workforce development, yes, for years too.
Right. I think Elaine, you had a question.
Yes, I was just going to ask about, Connecticut's come up. We're looking at your maps. The Gulf Stream changes are all along South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland. What kind of interstate work is being done?
Such a good question. Not much is the answer. Now, we, of course, have the Bay Commission. And Marissa, which is that Mid-Atlantic Association, they funded the rainfall project. So because of the Bay Agreement, it's like our communities are better positioned to play nice. And so we're partnering with them on getting the NOAA rainfall standards, which is called Atlas, and we're right now in Atlas 14 updated. And so it's a funding pool that we're working with them on. Through the Bay Commission, we've been working with them on making sure that the legislators and decision makers in all the Bay states are at least getting consistent, similar information. But the collaborations between states, they're happening with academic institutions, nonprofits that are like, hey, we did this. We were funded by the Albemarle Amplico Sound to do a project that we did in Virginia for Virginia specific things in North Carolina for them because they saw the value of it. So it's smaller shared experience knowledge transfer that is occurring, that's allowing for, the state to copy and paste legislative text and take it to the General Assembly in their state and things like that. The larger scale collaborations have yet to transpired in a meaningful way outside of the funding of the Atlas 14, which is the rainfall update for NOAA.
Thank you.
So I think we're at time, or is there probably one more question if anyone has?
And one more quick question, because you kind of
okay.
touched on this with the economic impact. But I was in Houston during Debbie and the power was out for so long. Like, what is the strain happening on like our energy grid? And is that a risk in Virginia at large?
Yes. Big risk is the answer. And the statewide emergency management plan looks at this every year. And what they're doing about it is a little bit less clear, but yes is the answer.
Okay, I'm going to let Celeste have the last word if you have a question.
Oh, it was great presentation. And I'd like to talk to you off list about a group that I think would like to hear this presentation, but put yourself in the position of funders. Let's say, for the sake of the argument, you've got unlimited funds and you can solve any one problem in this sector in the Northern Virginia area. Where would you put that money?
Workforce development.
Okay.
Workforce development in conservation landscaping practices and green infrastructure. In Northern Virginia, there are areas where sea level rise is taking its toll. on communities where everybody can get it, can agree, is that rainfall impacts are felt everywhere. And this idea that we are capturing rain or floodwater, holding on to it, allowing it to slowly enter the system it's a slam dunk from a risk perspective. And everybody seems to get behind it politically because it doesn't incite any conflict, because it's just about water. It's not about climate or anything like that. I don't think that's a problem for you all in Northern Virginia, but it could be. And so that's what I would say. We need more people who are trained to install these practices and maintain them. And that's the big thing that the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Certification was created to address, this problem of, yes, you have these practices, but nobody knows how to maintain it. If it's on a city library, the grounds crews, they don't know what this is. And so they weed whack it. And it's that type of, yes, put it in the ground, but then don't forget about it.
Yeah. No, this stuff needs maintenance.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. I think Lincoln, you're about to jump up. I appreciate people staying for a couple more minutes. We will send you the slides, I think, afterwards, and there's a recording. So I want to thank Mary-Carson for joining us today. And I think that this is going to really impact the focus areas for our grant making as well. So I thank you so much for helping us shed light on this issue and helping us become much more educated as we move forward.
Thanks for having me. Loved it. I put my email address in the chat, so please feel free to reach out if y'all have any questions or want to talk more.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah.